Watch this. Dale Pruitt leaned toward the man beside him, voice loud enough for 3 rows to hear. That old black man's about to spend his last $60 on a box that's been locked longer than his boy was alive. Laughter spread through the room. Not because it was funny, because Dale Pruitt had run Chatham County for 35 years, and laughing when he laughed was still the safest thing to do. Elijah Morse walked to the front table. 76 years old, wool coat, shoes worn thin at the heel. He set 3 $20 bills down without a word. Pruitt's voice followed him. $60. That's what a black man thinks justice costs. Your kind never could figure out how locks work. A woman in a red blazer called out, "Somebody tell him the scrapyard pays by the pound." The room broke open. Then Pruitt stood. Actually stood, straightened his jacket and said, 30 years that safe sat in a county warehouse. Nothing inside worth saving. Just like the black boy whose name is on the case file. Nothing then. Nothing now. The gavel came down. The laughter was deafening. Elijah folded his receipt, tucked it beside a photograph he had carried for 30 years. He didn't turn around, because he already knew something Pruitt didn't. That safe had a number stamped on the bottom. Case 93-4471. His son's case. Stay with this story, drop your location and local time in the comments right now. If you believe the truth always finds a way out, subscribe. What Elijah found inside that box will leave you speechless. The pickup truck groaned under the weight of the safe. Jalen Morse drove with both hands on the wheel, watching the rearview mirror every 30 seconds to make sure the straps were holding. The safe sat in the truck bed like a monument, 280 pounds of steel and rust, and 30 years of silence. Every time they hit a pothole on Highway 17, the whole truck shuddered. "Grandpa?" Jalen glanced over. "It weighs more than both of us combined. It doesn't open. And you paid $60 for it at a county auction while a retired sheriff laughed at you in front of 40 people." He paused. "I just want to make sure I understand the situation correctly." Elijah Morse sat in the passenger seat with his hands folded in his lap, looking straight ahead at the road. "You understand it fine. So why? Pull into the driveway first, then I'll show you." They turned onto Drayton Street as the sun dropped behind the rooftops. The house sat at the end of the block, white paint peeling off the siding in long curling strips. The front porch railing leaning 3 degrees to the left. A ceramic pot by the steps with a dead plant nobody had removed in 2 winters. Elijah had lived here for 41 years. He and Ruth had carried Calvin home from the hospital through that front door. He had carried Ruth out of it for the last time 8 years ago. It took them 50 minutes to get the safe inside. They had no equipment, no dolly, no neighbors willing to help at 7 in the evening. Just Jalen's back and Elijah's stubborn refusal to wait until morning. By the time they set it down in the living room, the floorboards dipped noticeably under the weight, and Jalen's arms were shaking so hard he had to sit on the floor and breathe. Elijah didn't sit. He walked to the hallway closet and came back carrying a wooden box the size of a bread loaf, dark with age, the brass latch tarnished, nearly black. He set it on the coffee table and opened it slowly. Inside, arranged in a fitted cloth tray, was a complete locksmith's kit. 45 years of tools, tension wrenches, decoders, plug spinners, a row of picks graduated from thick to thin as a hair. Every piece in the exact position it had been left in the last time the box was closed. The cloth was faded, but the tools were clean. Elijah had kept them clean every year since the stroke took him off the job. Jalen leaned forward. "Those are great-grandpa's tools, mine. I carried them for 45 years. Elijah lifted a small brass pick from the tray handle worn smooth where the thumb rested. "This one I called the listener. You hold it light. You don't push. You wait for the lock to tell you where it's ready." He held it up to the lamp. The brass caught the light. My father taught me on a padlock in a garage on Habersham Street. I was 9 years old. He said every lock has a voice. Most people just aren't patient enough to hear it. Elijah set the pick back in its place. I taught Calvin the same thing. Saturday mornings. Same garage, different padlock. He was good at it. Better than me by the time he was 12. Jalen went quiet. Jalen went. His father's name did that to a room. Elijah walked to the safe and crouched in front of it. He ran his thumb along the left side panel, found the dent he was looking for, then traced the diagonal scratch across the face of the dial. He held there for a moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a photograph worn at the edges, the color faded to something softer than it once was. He held it next to the safe. Same dent. Left panel. Same scratch across the dial running from 8 o'clock to 4. Grandpa? Jalen's voice was careful. Where's that photo from? Evidence inventory. Case number 93-4471. The State of Georgia versus Calvin Morse. Elijah set the photograph on the floor next to the safe. This is the safe from your father's case. The one they said held $4,000 Calvin supposedly stole from the warehouse. Jalen sat very still. They never opened it during trial, Elijah continued. The prosecution told the jury it held the stolen money. The defense attorney, the one who showed up smelling like bourbon, never once asked to see inside. The jury convicted your father in 5 hours and 40 minutes without ever seeing what was in this box. Jalen opened his laptop. He had pulled the court records last semester for a criminal justice seminar, read them once written, his paper closed the file, and told himself he wouldn't read them again. Reading your own father's trial transcript was not something you did more than once. Tonight, he opened the file again. Page 38. The Forensic Analysis Report. Latent print examination of safe exterior results inconclusive. Page 61. Dale Pruitt's sworn testimony. Fingerprint analysis confirmed a positive match to the defendant. Jalen looked up from the screen. These 2 pages say completely different things. I know. One says inconclusive. The other says positive match. They can't both be true. No, Elijah said. They can't. How long have you known? Elijah looked at the safe, at the dent, at the scratch across the dial, at the photograph of his son's case sitting on the living room floor of the house where his son had grown up. 30 years, he said. I've known for 30 years. I just couldn't prove it. He picked up the listener from the wooden box, pressed his ear against the cold steel door of the safe, and closed his eyes. But I can hear it now, he said quietly. It's ready to talk. Calvin Morse was 28 years old the night they arrested him. He worked the overnight shift at a Chatham County warehouse on Stiles Avenue inventory, loading the kind of work that paid $11.40 an hour and required you to be somewhere quiet and unglamorous at 11 o'clock at night while the rest of the city slept. He had been doing it for 2 years. He was saving for a deposit on an apartment. He wanted to bring his girlfriend and their 8-month-old son, Jalen, not yet walking home to a place that belonged to them. At 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday in October 1993, 4 patrol cars surrounded the warehouse. Dale Pruitt walked in first. 41 years old, broad shoulders, the kind of voice that filled a room without trying. He had been Chatham County Sheriff for 6 years and had never once lost a case he personally decided to close. Calvin Morse. Pruitt said it the way men say names when they've already made up their minds. You're under arrest for armed robbery and theft of county property. Calvin looked up from the inventory sheet. I've been here since 8. Check the logbook. My supervisor signed me in. Logbook's been secured as evidence. That's not possible. It was on the desk 20 minutes ago. Pruitt looked at him for a long moment. Are you calling me a liar, son? They put Calvin in handcuffs in front of his coworker, Curtis Webb. Curtis was 29 on probation for a prior conviction, supporting his mother and a 4-year-old daughter on the same $11.40 an hour. He stood behind the shelving unit and watched them walk Calvin out and said nothing. Pruitt glanced at Curtis on the way past. Just a glance. But Curtis understood exactly what it meant. Calvin called Elijah from the station. One call. Voice tight, trying to hold itself together. "Daddy, I didn't do anything. I was there the whole night. The logbook will show it. Please find the logbook." The logbook was never entered into evidence. The official report stated it had been lost during the initial scene documentation. Elijah drove to every law office in Savannah that week. Brick buildings downtown, strip mall consultations on the south side. 2 attorneys who took his calls and then stopped returning them when he mentioned Pruitt's name. Nobody wanted a case against the county sheriff. Not for a young black man whose guilt the department had already announced in a press release the morning after the arrest. The public defender assigned to Calvin was a man named Gerald Fitch. Fitch showed up to the preliminary hearing 17 minutes late. He showed up to the trial smelling of something that wasn't coffee. He asked the prosecution's witnesses 4 questions combined across 2 days of testimony. He never once requested to examine the safe. He never once challenged the fingerprint evidence. He presented no witnesses of his own. The jury deliberated for 5 hours and 40 minutes. Guilty on all counts. 25 years. Calvin spent his first month writing appeals by hand on lined paper from the commissary. He filed 3 in the first year. Each one was denied within 30 days, faster, Elijah later learned, than most appeals were even reviewed. He called home every Sunday, collect. Elijah and Ruth worked double shifts to cover the phone bills. Elijah on locksmith calls across the county, Ruth at the hospital laundry on Eisenhower Drive. Shiva at the hospital laundry on phone. Calvin told them about the food, about the noise at night, about the man 2 cells down who prayed out loud every morning at 5. He never once told them he was scared. Elijah knew anyway. A father always knows. In the 4th year, Calvin's appeals stopped. His letters became shorter. Then they stopped coming on Sundays and started coming whenever he could manage, which was less and less. Then came the morning Elijah would spend the rest of his life trying to forget. 2 days before Christmas, year 4. The phone rang at 2:14 in the morning. Ruth answered it. Elijah watched her face change in the dark, the way a face changes when the worst thing it has ever been told arrives through a telephone at 2 in the morning, and there is no preparing for it, no matter how many years you have spent dreading it. She set the phone down on the nightstand without hanging it up. "Calvin has pneumonia," she said. "He's been sick for 11 days. She stopped. "They said he passed an hour ago. They said they tried to reach us sooner, but the paperwork got delayed." 11 days. Calvin had been dying for 11 days, and the prison had not called. He was 28 years old. 3 weeks later, an envelope arrived from Chatham County Correctional. Inside was a printed, itemized statement. Medical services rendered. Evaluation. 1 dosage of standard antibiotics administered on day 9. The total at the bottom was $340. They were billing Elijah for the treatment that hadn't saved his son. Elijah sat at the kitchen table with that bill for a long time. Ruth stood in the doorway and didn't say anything. There was nothing to say. He folded it once and put it in the wooden box with Calvin's last letter and the photograph of the safe from the evidence file. He never paid it. Ruth died 8 years later. Heart attack, the doctors said. Elijah sat beside her bed in the hospital and held her hand and thought about how a person could survive the worst thing imaginable and still find a way to keep moving, and how sometimes the body simply ran out of ways to keep doing that. He buried her on a Saturday. The following Monday, he went back to work, because there was still something left to find, and he had promised her he would find it. Now, 30 years later, the safe sat in his living room. And for the first time since that night in 1993, Elijah Morse felt the distance between himself and the truth begin to close. The first night, Elijah worked until 3 in the morning and got nothing. He knelt on the living room floor with the listener pressed between his fingers and his ear against the cold steel door and turned the dial one click at a time. The safe was a Diebold 3-wheel combination, 1960s model, the kind they installed in county facilities back when permanence was still a value people built into furniture. Heavy, deliberate, made to outlast the people who used it. Elijah had opened 14 Diebolds in his career. He knew the voice. He just needed to hear it again. The first wheel was stubborn. He worked it for 90 minutes, found nothing, reset, started over. Jalen fell asleep on the couch at midnight with his laptop open on his chest. Elijah draped a blanket over him without breaking concentration and went back to the dial. By 3 a.m., his knees ached and his right hand had cramped twice. He stood up slowly, stretched, looked at the safe for a long moment. "Not yet," he said to it. "That's fine." He went to bed. At 6, he was back on the floor. This became the pattern of the next 2 weeks. Elijah at the safe every evening after dinner, sometimes past midnight, sometimes until 2 or 3 in the morning. Jalen brought coffee at 11 and a blanket at 1. Elijah accepted the coffee on the first night and left it untouched, so after that, Jalen just left it on the table beside him and stopped expecting it to be drunk. The blanket he never used at all. "You should sleep," Jalen said on the 4th night. "I will. Grandpa, it's 1:30. I know what time it is." Jalen stood in the doorway a moment longer. Did great-grandpa ever talk about how long it took him to open a hard one? Elijah didn't look up from the dial. He opened a Diebold at a school on Abercorn Street once. Board of Education wanted the records inside. Took him 11 days. A quiet click. Not the right one. He reset. He said the lock wasn't being difficult. It was just waiting to make sure he was serious. Jalen went to bed. Elijah kept working. On the 7th day, he found the first wheel. He felt it before he heard it, a faint settling, a microscopic give in the resistance, the way a lock communicates readiness, not in sound, but in pressure. He held the wheel there, barely breathing, confirmed it 3 times, and marked the position with a small piece of tape on the dial face. Then he started on the second wheel. On the 9th night, he found something he hadn't expected. He was working the second wheel when his thumb, moving along the bottom edge of the safe, found a ridge. He stopped, tilted the floor lamp closer. There, stamped into the steel along the lower rear panel in letters no larger than a thumbnail, was a series of numbers and letters that had been partially scratched over with something sharp, deliberately obscured, but not completely. CPD Evidence Case 93-4471. Elijah sat back on his heels. Chatham Police Department. Evidence. Case 93-4471. Calvin's case number. Not similar. Not close. Exact. This was not a safe that happened to look like the one in the evidence photograph. This was the safe. The original evidence. The same box Pruitt had told a jury held $4,000 of stolen money. The box he had never opened in court, never allowed the defense to examine, never submitted for independent forensic review. Elijah pressed his palm flat against the top of the safe. Held it there. 30 years. The safe had been in a county warehouse for 30 years, classified as inactive evidence from a closed case sitting in a row with hundreds of other items no one had looked at since the verdict came in. When the county liquidated the old evidence storage facility last spring to make room for a new municipal building, Everything unclaimed went to public auction. No one checked the contents. No one matched the case numbers against the conviction records. No one looked twice at a rusted Diebold that had been signed out of the evidence log in 1994 and never signed back in. No one except Elijah, who had spent 30 years waiting for exactly this moment. He went back to the second wheel. On the 11th night, he found it. On the 14th night, working slowly, he found the third. He sat back. His hands were trembling not from effort, but from something older and deeper than effort. The kind of trembling that comes when the body finally understands what the mind has known for a long time. 30 years of waiting had gathered in his chest like water behind a dam, and the dam was one pull of a handle away from breaking. Jalen was in the doorway in his sweatpants, half asleep, holding a mug. "Grandpa?" "Get a towel," Elijah said. "Lay it on the kitchen table." Jalen set the mug down and did it. Elijah gripped the handle with both hands. The hinges shrieked. Rust flaked off in dry orange sheets. The door swung open, and the smell hit them both. Stale air sealed darkness, the specific stillness of a space that had been closed since before Jalen was old enough to walk. Inside a thick manila envelope, a VHS tape in a clear plastic sleeve, a small black leather notebook held shut with a rubber band that crumbled the moment Elijah touched it, and sitting in the corner of the safe, inexplicably sealed in its original packaging and completely untouched, a box of Oreo cookies. The expiration date on the back read March 1994. Elijah stared at it for one full second, then set it aside without a word. Jalen looked at the cookies, looked at his grandfather, and decided that was a question for another time. Elijah opened the notebook. The first page stopped his breath entirely. The notebook was small. Black leather cover, no title, no label. The pages had yellowed at the edges, but the ink was still sharp, small, precise handwriting that slanted slightly to the left. The kind of handwriting that belonged to someone who had learned penmanship before computers made it irrelevant. Elijah turned to the first page. A list. 6 names written one beneath the other, each with a date beside it. After every name in red ink, a single word closed. He read them slowly. Andre Tillman. March 14th, 1991. Calvin Morse. October 22nd, 1993. Devin Price. July 8th, 1995. Marcus Webb. February 3rd, 1997. Terrence Floyd. September 11th, 1999. James Okafor. April 4th, 2001. 6 names. 6 dates. 6 men. 6 times the word closed written in red ink like a grade on a test, like an item checked off a to-do list, like the lives of 6 human beings had been administrative tasks that someone had completed and filed away. Elijah turned to the inside front cover. Stamped in faded blue ink, slightly crooked, the letters pressed hard into the paper. Property of D. Pruitt, Chatham County Sheriff's Office. The room was completely silent. Jalen stood at the kitchen table. He had not moved since Elijah carried the notebook over. His eyes went from the names to the stamp on the cover and back to the names. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. He kept a record. He kept a record, Elijah said. Why would he keep a record of the people he framed? Elijah didn't answer immediately. He turned to the second page. The same precise handwriting filling the page in tight columns, dates, names, notations, interview schedules, witness contact information, and beside each witness name a short phrase in parentheses. For Curtis Webb's name, beside Calvin's entry, the phrase read, "Probation leverage daughter, age 4." Elijah set the notebook down very carefully as if it were made of something that could shatter. He opened the manila envelope. Inside was a document on Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences letterhead, except the header read, Georgia Bureau of Investigation, Forensic Sciences Division, Chatham County. Dated October 28, 1993, 4 days before Calvin's trial began. Elijah read the conclusion line once, then he read it again. Then he set it on the table and stepped back. No identifiable latent fingerprint evidence matching the suspect was recovered from the safe exterior or surrounding surfaces. Examination of all submitted evidence yielded no match, no partial match, no match of any kind. No match. Not inconclusive. Not partial. None. The report that had been entered into evidence at Calvin's trial stated a positive match. Elijah had read that report so many times over 30 years, he could recite it word for word. Pruitt had testified under oath, right hand, raised eyes, steady voice, filling that courtroom. That fingerprint analysis confirmed Calvin Morse had touched that safe. The original report said the opposite, and the original report had been sitting in this safe ever since. Jalen had both hands pressed flat on the table. His knuckles had gone white. Elijah picked up the VHS tape. A strip of masking tape along the spine read, W, October 22nd, 1993. Same handwriting. Same date as Calvin's entry in the notebook. They found an old VHS player in the hall closet, the kind Elijah had used to record church services in the 90s. Jalen connected it to the television. His hands were unsteady. The television flickered. Static. Then the picture resolved into a dim room, a metal desk, 2 chairs. Pruitt's voice came first. Younger, fuller. The same unmistakable cadence. Curtis, sit down. I'm going to make this very simple for you. A younger man's voice. Tight. Barely holding. I already told the other officer what I saw. Calvin was there the whole... Stop. A pause. You're on probation, Curtis. You know what that means. 1 phone call from me and you're back inside. Your daughter, she's 4 years old. You want her growing up taking the bus to visit Daddy on Saturdays. Silence on the tape. Here's what you're going to tell the court. Calvin left the warehouse at 9 p.m. He came back at 11:40 with a crowbar and a bag. You saw him go to the back office. You heard the safe. You understand. Curtis Webb's voice barely audible. But that's not... Do you understand, Curtis? A long silence. Then, yes. Good. Now let's go over exactly what you're going to say about the crowbar. Elijah reached over and pressed stop. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Jalen was gripping the edge of the table so hard, his arms were shaking. He stared at the frozen image on the television screen, the dim room, the metal desk, the 2 chairs, and did not speak for a long time. Then Elijah turned to the last page of the notebook he hadn't read yet. It was different from the others, not a list of names, but a column of figures. Case numbers on the left, dollar amounts on the right. And at the top of the column, a heading written in the same precise hand, Budget Justification FY 91 through FY 2. Each closed case corresponded to a budget increase for the sheriff's department. The smallest increment was $9,000. The largest was $22,000. At the bottom of the column, a handwritten total with a small notation beside it, plus 3 promotions. 6 men. 6 families. 6 destroyed lives. And beside each one in the neat, careful handwriting of a man who kept excellent records, the dollar amount his career had been worth. Elijah closed the notebook. He looked at Jalen. Call information. Find me a lawyer named Monica Osei. Monica Osei operated out of a converted row house on Farm Street, brick exterior, A hand-painted sign above the door, two paralegals who shared a single printer that jammed reliably every fourth page. She had spent 15 years taking cases that larger firms declined to touch. Police misconduct, wrongful conviction, prosecutorial fraud. She won more than she lost, which in her particular area of law was considered remarkable. Jalen called at 6 in the morning. Monica answered on the second ring. By 8 a.m. they were sitting at her conference table, which was a door laid across two sawhorses and covered with a piece of tempered glass, with the notebook, the forensic report, and the VHS tape arranged between them. Monica listened to the tape without expression. When Pruitt's voice said, "Your daughter, she's what, 4 years old?" she pressed pause, rewound it 12 seconds, and played it again. Her jaw tightened. She read the forensic report twice, both pages, then held it up to the window light. She opened the notebook and ran her finger down each name. She stopped at the second entry, Calvin Morse. Then she stopped at the first, Andre Tillman. She stood up, went to her filing cabinet, and pulled a folder from the second drawer. She set it on the glass table and opened it without sitting back down. "I represented Andre Tillman's daughter in 2011, she said quietly. "Civil suit against the county. We couldn't prove misconduct, couldn't find the original evidence, couldn't locate the forensic file. The case was dismissed for insufficient documentation." She looked at the notebook. "I have seen this handwriting before. In a document I couldn't explain and couldn't use." And she closed the folder. She looked at Elijah. "I'll take the case. No fee." Elijah nodded once. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." Pruitt has spent 30 years building relationships in this county. The DA went to his retirement dinner. 2 of the sitting judges played golf with him for 20 years. This is going to be a fight. "I know what kind of fight it is," Elijah said. "I've been in it for 30 years. Monica filed the motion to reopen Calvin's case on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, the filings were public record. By Friday evening, a local reporter had pulled them and posted a summary online. By Saturday morning, 2 of the 6 families in the notebook had called Monica's office. By Monday, it was 4. Word moved through the churches first, then through the neighborhood associations, then onto the local news. An elderly black man had purchased a rusted safe at a county auction for $60. Inside, he had found evidence that a decorated county sheriff had been systematically framing black men for a decade to justify budget increases and career advancement. The story had a number, $60. The story had a face: Elijah Morse, 76 years old, standing on his front porch on Drayton Street, with his hands at his sides. Pruitt found out on a Tuesday. He was eating breakfast at his regular table at a diner on Broughton Street when his former deputy called, told him about the filing, told him about the tape, told him about the notebook. Pruitt set down his fork, took out his phone, and made 3 calls in the parking lot before driving away. That afternoon, his silver Lincoln pulled up in front of Elijah's house on Drayton Street. Pruitt got out, walked up the porch steps, opened the front door without knocking, and walked into the living room. Elijah was sitting at the kitchen table. The notebook was open in front of him. Pruitt looked around the room at the safe in the corner, with its door hanging open, at the television, where the VHS player was still connected, at Elijah, sitting very still at the table. Then he looked at Elijah. "Eli." His voice was the same one from the tape, just older, just slower. "You need to stop this." "Sit down, Dale." "I'm not sitting. What you think you have in that box is not what you think it is. You're an old man who's been grieving for 30 years, and you found something that looks like an answer. It isn't." "Then why did you come here?" Pruitt's jaw tightened. He hadn't expected the question to land that cleanly. "Because I don't want to watch you embarrass yourself." Calvin made choices. The jury heard the evidence. This is done. The jury heard evidence you fabricated. The jury heard testimony from a witness who was present. The forensic report was The original forensic report said no match. Elijah's voice was completely level. You substituted a different report before trial. The original has been in that safe for 30 years, along with the tape of you threatening Curtis Webb's 4-year-old daughter. Pruitt went very still. Gum. Jalen stepped into the kitchen from the hallway. 6 feet 1 arms folded, standing in the doorway without moving. Mr. Pruitt, Jalen said, you came into this house without an invitation. I'm going to ask you once to leave. Pruitt looked at him for a long moment. You must be Calvin's boy. He looked Jalen up and down slowly, the way he had looked at Calvin 30 years ago across a warehouse floor. Playing lawyer just like your daddy played innocent. My father was innocent, Jalen said, and you know it. Pruitt looked between them. Then he buttoned his jacket, turned, and walked out through the front door. On the porch, he pulled out his phone. Elijah heard 4 words through the screen door before it swung shut behind him. We have a problem. That night, someone flattened both tires on Jalen's car. The next morning, the word stop was painted in red across the bottom porch step. Jalen scrubbed it off before Elijah woke up. But 3 days later, while Elijah and Monica stood in line at the courthouse filing window to submit the formal evidence package on that same morning, 6 blocks away at Savannah City Hall, the City Council convened a previously scheduled public ceremony to present Dale Pruitt with the Chatham County Distinguished Service Medal. The mayor shook his hand. A photographer took pictures. Pruitt smiled into the camera with the relaxed confidence of a man who had never once been held accountable for anything. Elijah learned about the ceremony that evening when Jalen showed him the photograph on his phone. He looked at it for a long time. Then he set the phone face down on the table and went back to preparing his testimony. Curtis Webb lived in a rented room above an auto repair shop on Wrightsboro Road in Augusta, up a narrow staircase that smelled of motor oil and damp wood, through a door that stuck in its frame. Jalen drove the 2 hours alone on a Thursday morning, with the address from the 30-year-old court records, and no guarantee Curtis was still there. He was. Curtis opened the door in a gray undershirt and work pants, 59 years old, thin, in the way that came from years of not eating well, rather than from exercise. 3 empty bottles stood on the kitchen counter. A television played in the corner to an empty chair. He looked at Jalen standing in the doorway and did not look surprised. I figured someone would come eventually, Curtis said. Took longer than I thought. Jalen sat at the kitchen table, a folding card table, with a paperback book under one leg to keep it level. He set Monica's small recorder between them, then reached into his bag and placed the VHS tape on the table. Curtis looked at it. His face did not change, but his hands, which had been resting flat on the table, slowly curled inward until they were fists. You have a way to play that? He asked. I have the transcript, Jalen said. I've heard it. Curtis nodded slowly. He didn't speak for almost a full minute. I was 29, he finally said. Calvin and I worked the same shift 3 nights a week. He was a good man, quiet, kept to himself. He talked about his son all the time, I guess. You were about 8 months old. He had a photograph of you in his locker. Showed it to me the week before they arrested him. Curtis stopped, swallowed. He never left that warehouse. I watched him stock shelves and mop the floor and count the register twice because that was who he was. Careful, honest. He was there the whole night. But you told the court he left at 9. Pruitt came to my apartment the morning after the arrest. I lived on Gwinnett Street, then 3rd floor, no elevator. He knocked on my door at 7 a.m. in full uniform like it was a normal thing to do. Curtis's voice was flat and precise, the voice of a man who had replayed this particular memory so many times it had worn smooth. He sat at my kitchen table and told me what to say. Told me exactly how to say it. Told me if I didn't, he'd call my probation officer that afternoon and I'd be back inside before dinner. My daughter was 4 years old. She was in the next room. I could hear her cartoons playing through the wall the whole time he was talking. He uncurled his hands and pressed them flat on the table again. I told myself I'd come forward later, when things settled, when it was safer, but things never settled. And then Calvin died. And I kept not saying anything. 30 years of not saying anything. He looked at his hands. My daughter figured it out when she was 25. Don't ask me how she just knew. She came to me and asked me directly, and I couldn't lie to her. She cut me off that same day. Sent me one message: you let an innocent man die so you could stay free. I haven't spoken to her in 5 years. Jalen was quiet for a moment. Mr. Webb, Monica needs you to testify. I know. Pruitt still has connections in this county. It won't be easy. Curtis almost laughed, a short, hard sound that had nothing in it that resembled humor. Son, I haven't slept through the night since 1993. You think I'm worried about easy? He signed the affidavit that afternoon at Monica's office in Savannah. His hand trembled on every page, a fine, constant tremor that didn't stop and didn't slow. But he signed every line, and when it was done, he capped the pen and set it on the table and sat very straight in his chair. Monica drove him back to Augusta herself. On the way, she told him about the other families. The first name in this notebook, Andre Tillman, had died in Hancock State Prison in 1998 of a heart attack. He was 43 years old. His son Marcus was now 38, drove long-haul trucks out of Macon, and had grown up telling people his father was away for work because the truth was too heavy to carry. Marcus had called Monica's office the previous week. He drove to Savannah the following Saturday and sat across from Elijah at the kitchen table on Drayton Street. They recognized something in each other, immediately, the particular expression of a person who has spent decades being the only one who knew. Devin Price, the fourth name in the notebook, had served 20 years and been released in 2015. He worked at a car wash on Montpelier Avenue in Savannah, $7 an hour, no benefits. He had never told his employer or his neighbors or the woman he rented a room from that he had once been convicted of a crime he didn't commit, because there was no framework in his life for that sentence to exist inside. When Monica contacted him, he came to her office the next morning before it opened and sat on the front step waiting. 3 families, 3 stories, 1 notebook, 1 handwriting, 1 word in red ink after every name. Then Pruitt escalated. Curtis received a phone call at 1:15 in the morning, 2 nights after signing the affidavit. No voice, just breathing. A hang-up. The next night the same. The third night, a text from an unknown number. Your daughter lives on Sumter Street. Nice neighborhood. Curtis called Monica at dawn. His voice was wrecked. He knows where she lives. Monica reported the threats to the FBI field office in Savannah that morning. A federal agent took Curtis's statement, documented the texts, and opened a file. But Curtis sat in Monica's office and shook his head slowly. Federal file doesn't protect her tonight, he said. Monica looked at him. Curtis, every family in that notebook is standing up. Andre Tillman's son drove 4 hours to be here. Devin Price was on your doorstep before I opened. If a man who lost 30 years of his life can stand up in that courtroom, so can you. Curtis stared at the table for a long time. Then he looked up. How many of them are going? All of them, Monica said. He was quiet for a moment. Then I'm going. Outside Monica's window, Savannah moved through its ordinary Thursday traffic on Farm Street, a delivery truck idling at the corner, 2 women walking past with coffee. Ordinary. Unhurried. Completely unaware that in a small office above a converted row house, the last piece of a 30-year silence had just agreed to speak. November 9th arrived cold and clear. 30 years and 47 days after Calvin Morse was arrested in a warehouse on Stiles Avenue, Dale Pruitt walked into the Chatham County Courthouse at 8:43 in the morning. Black suit, silver tie. His old sheriff's badge, retired no longer valid, pinned to his lapel anyway. He moved through the marble lobby the way he had moved through it for 35 years, like a man who understood that buildings remember the people who have owned them. His attorney, Raymond Voss, walked beside him. Voss was 61, silver-haired, the most expensive defense attorney in Savannah. He had also, 30 years ago, served as assistant district attorney for Chatham County. He had been in the courtroom during Calvin Morse's trial. He had sat at the prosecution table. He had watched Gerald Fitch fall asleep in his chair and said nothing. Now he was on the other side of the same case, and no one in the building had moved to sanction him for it. Elijah arrived at 8:51. Gray coat, pressed but old. Shoes polished to a mirror shine, the same shoes he had worn to Ruth's funeral, to Calvin's funeral, to every important morning of his adult life. He carried nothing except Calvin's photograph in his breast pocket. Jalen walked on his left. Monica walked on his right. The courtroom filled quickly. Local press took the left gallery. National cameras lined the back wall, 3 networks, 2 cable outlets, a documentary crew that Monica had granted limited access. The families sat in the first 2 rows. Marcus Tillman, Devon Price. The wives and children and siblings of men whose names were written in red ink in a black leather notebook. Curtis Webb sat alone in the 3rd row, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on a point somewhere above the bench. The clerk called the room to order. Everyone rose. The judge entered. Honorable Patricia Wynn, 22 years on the bench, a woman known for 2 things, patience and zero tolerance for courtroom theater. She sat, arranged her papers, and looked out at a standing room courtroom without visible reaction. Be seated. Monica stood. Your Honor, we are here today because a 76-year-old man bought a broken safe at a county auction for $60. She paused, letting the number settle. And inside that safe was everything Dale Pruitt spent 30 years trying to bury. She walked to the evidence table and picked up the VHS tape. The bailiff connected the player to the courtroom's audio system. Monica pressed play. Static. Then Pruitt's voice, younger, fuller, but unmistakable, filled every corner of the room. Curtis, sit down. I'm going to make this very simple for you. Nobody moved. The camera operators held still. In the front row, Devon Price closed his eyes. Marcus Tillman pressed his hands together between his knees. You're on probation, Curtis. 1 phone call from me and you're back inside. Your daughter, she's 4 years old. You want her growing up, taking the bus to visit Daddy on Saturdays? In the 3rd row, Curtis Webb stared at his hands. Here's what you're going to tell the court. Calvin left the warehouse at 9 p.m. Monica let the tape run to its end. Nobody in the courtroom spoke. A woman in the gallery had her hand pressed over her mouth. A man 3 rows back had his eyes closed and his jaw locked tight. Then from the public gallery, a sound quiet, almost inaudible. The court clerk, a woman of 68, who had typed the original trial transcript in 1993, lowered her head onto her folded arms. She didn't make a scene. She just lowered her head slowly, the way a person does when something they have carried without knowing they were carrying, it finally becomes too heavy. Monica set the tape down and picked up the forensic report. This is the original analysis from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation Forensic Sciences Division, dated October 28, 1993, 4 days before trial. She read the conclusion line clearly without inflection. No identifiable latent fingerprint evidence matching the suspect was recovered from the safe exterior or surrounding surfaces. No match, not inconclusive, not partial, none. She turned to face Voss. And yet at trial, Dale Pruitt testified under oath that fingerprint analysis confirmed a positive match to Calvin Morse. He raised his right hand, looked at a jury, and lied. And a 28-year-old man went to prison and died there. Voss objected. Judge Wynne overruled without looking up from her notes. Monica held up the notebook. The leather cover caught the courtroom light. 6 names, Your Honor. 6 men, each arrested by Dale Pruitt, each convicted on evidence that was fabricated or testimony that was coerced. The budget justification column in this notebook documents the financial benefit Pruitt derived from each conviction, increased departmental funding equipment allocations, and noted here in his own handwriting 3 separate career promotions. Then Raymond Voss stood and filed his emergency motion. The VHS tape, he argued, had been obtained from an unsecured evidence item sold at public auction without proper chain of custody documentation. Its contents were inadmissible. Judge Wynne read the motion. She read Monica's counterfiling. She set both down. Motion denied. The item was legally purchased at public auction. Contents discovered on private property require no warrant. All evidence remains admissible. Voss sat down slowly. Then something happened that Monica had not anticipated. From the public gallery, a woman stood up. 44 years old, dark hair composed but pale. She raised her hand toward the bench. Your Honor, my name is Diane Pruitt. I am Dale Pruitt's daughter. I am requesting permission to address the court. The room went absolutely still. Pruitt turned in his seat. For the first time since walking through the courthouse door that morning, his face showed something other than composure. He looked at his daughter standing in the gallery, hand raised, and his expression shifted into something that had no name but was visible to everyone in the room. Judge Wynne looked at Diane over her glasses. You may approach. Diane Pruitt walked to the front of the courtroom without looking at her father. She was composed in the way that people are composed when they have rehearsed a moment for a long time, and are now simply executing it, each step deliberate, each breath controlled. She stood at the witness position and faced Judge Wynne directly. In 2019, she began, I was helping my father clear out the storage unit he had rented since retiring. He asked me to sort through the filing boxes while he dealt with the movers. In the third box I opened beneath a layer of old departmental newsletters, I found a notebook. She paused. Black leather cover. I recognized his handwriting immediately. I read the first page. Then I closed it and put it back in the box and told myself it wasn't my place to do anything about it. The courtroom was silent. I told myself that for 4 years, every day for 4 years, I told myself it wasn't my place. Her voice remained level, but something behind it was working very hard. Then I saw the footage from the county auction. My father standing in that room at saying what he said to an old man in a wool coat who had just spent $60 on a box that held his son's name. She stopped, and I understood that I had been using the word place to mean comfortable, and I was done being comfortable. She looked at Elijah for the first time. He was watching her from the respondent's table with an expression she couldn't fully read, not warm, not hard, something in between that was more honest than either. I contacted Monica Ose 2 weeks ago, Diane continued. I told her everything I knew. I told her about the notebook, about the storage unit, about the 4 years I said nothing. I am not here to ask for understanding. I am here because Calvin Morse had a father who never stopped fighting for him. And the least I can do is stop protecting mine. Judge Wynne nodded. Thank you, Ms. Pruitt. You may be seated. Diane walked back to the gallery. She did not look at her father as she passed his table. Pruitt watched her sit down, and then he looked away, and after that he did not look at her again. Curtis Webb was called to the witness stand. He walked up slowly. His shirt was buttoned incorrectly, second button, in the first hole, everything offset by 1. He had clearly dressed carefully and the nerves had undone it. He sat down, adjusted the microphone, and looked across the courtroom at Dale Pruitt for the first time in 30 years. Pruitt met his eyes. His expression said, "Don't." Curtis looked away from him. He looked at the judge. "I was 29 years old," he began. "Calvin and I worked the same shift. He was there the whole night. I watched him. He stocked shelves. He mopped the floor. He counted the register twice because that was who he was, careful, honest, the kind of man who double-checked things, not because he was nervous, but because he took his work seriously." His voice was steady now. The tremor in his hands was visible, but his voice had found something solid to stand on. Dale Pruitt came to my apartment the morning after the arrest. He sat at my kitchen table and told me what I was going to say. He told me if I didn't say it, I was going back to prison and my daughter was going to grow up without me. She was 4 years old. I could hear her cartoons playing in the next room while he talked. Curtis stopped. His throat worked. I said what he told me to say. I looked Calvin's father in the eye in that courtroom. I looked at this man right here and I lied. And Calvin went to prison. And he died there. And I have been carrying that every single day for 30 years. He gripped the edge of the witness box. "Calvin, if you can hear me anywhere, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I was too scared. I'm sorry it took this long." The courtroom was silent, except for the sound of Devin Price crying quietly in the front row. Marcus Tillman sat with his head bowed. The court clerk had not lifted her head from her arms. Judge Wynn called a 15-minute recess. When court reconvened, Elijah Morse was invited to give a victim impact statement. He stood slowly. Jalen reached for his arm. Elijah waved him off. He walked to the front of the courtroom carrying nothing. No papers, no notes. Just Calvin's photograph held loosely at his side. He did not look at Pruitt. He looked at Judge Wynn. "Your Honor, my name is Elijah Morse. I am 76 years old. I have been fighting for my son's name since 1993. He stopped. "Let that number sit in the room. My wife Ruth fought beside me until the grief wore her heart out. She died 8 years ago. My grandson Jalen grew up without a father because of what happened in a courtroom 30 years ago. He is sitting in this room today, finishing law school." He raised the photograph. "This is Calvin. He was 28. He worked nights to save money for his family. He called me from the police station and said, 'Daddy, I was there the whole night. Check the logbook.' I have heard those words every single day since. In my sleep, at the kitchen table, in church. Every day for 30 years. His voice was not loud. It was not angry. It was simply clear, the voice of a man who had waited a very long time to say something true in a room that was finally ready to hear it. I bought a broken safe for $60. A man laughed at me. The same man who put my son in a cage and left him there to die laughed at me in front of 40 people and said my kind couldn't figure out how locks work." He lowered the photograph. "I figured it out. It took 30 years, but I figured it out. I am not here for revenge. I am here because my son wrote me a letter from prison that said the truth was in that safe. Don't stop fighting." So I didn't stop. He looked at the families in the front rows. "And I am here because there are 5 other families in this room who lost fathers and sons, and years they will never recover. We are not asking for sympathy. We are asking for the truth to be entered into the record. Say my son's name in this courtroom. Put it on paper. Let my grandson carry his father's name without shame." He walked back to his seat. Jalen took his hand. Judge Wynn removed her glasses, set them on the bench, looked at the courtroom for a long moment. "The court finds sufficient evidence to vacate the conviction of Calvin Morse effective immediately." She picked up her glasses. The court further orders a full investigation into the conduct of Dale Pruitt in connection with all 6 cases documented in the evidence presented today, to be conducted in coordination with the FBI field office in Savannah. Pruitt sat completely still. Voss leaned in and whispered. Pruitt did not respond. He looked around the courtroom slowly, the families in the front rows, the cameras in the back. Curtis Webb still sitting in the witness box with his head bowed, his daughter in the gallery not looking at him. Not a single friendly face in the room. Voss whispered again. Dale, we need to discuss a plea. Pruitt buttoned his jacket, stood, and walked toward the exit with the careful, measured steps of a man who understood that the floor he had walked on for 35 years had finally given way beneath him. 3 months later, the Chatham County Court issued its final order. 2 pages, clean language, no ambiguity. The last line read, "The defendant is hereby declared innocent of all charges." The conviction of Calvin Morse is vacated in its entirety and expunged from the public record. Elijah read those 2 pages at the kitchen table on Drayton Street, alone at 7 in the morning, with a cup of coffee. He didn't drink, he read them twice. Then he folded them once along. The center walked to the hallway and framed them himself, a simple wooden frame he had bought at the hardware store on Abercorn the week before, as if he had known the exact dimensions of what was coming. He hung the frame on the wall beside Calvin's photograph. Beneath both on the narrow hallway table he placed the wooden box with the locksmith tools inside it, lid open, the listener resting across the top. Then he stood there for a while and didn't say anything. Dale Pruitt was indicted on 11 counts. Evidence tampering, coerced testimony, obstruction of justice, perjury, federal civil rights violations under statute. The FBI investigation expanded within weeks. 2 former deputies agreed to cooperate and described in detail a system that had operated for over a decade. Pruitt identifying vulnerable suspects, fabricating physical evidence, using parole status as leverage against witnesses, closing cases on accelerated timelines to justify budget requests, building a career one destroyed life at a time. His bail was set at $1.8 million. He posted it. But the Savannah he had commanded for 35 years had already rendered its own verdict. His neighbors stopped waving. The diner on Broughton Street asked him not to return. The Chatham County Law Enforcement Association removed his photograph from their wall of honor. His trial date was set for the following spring. He faced 12 to 18 years. Devin Price received his formal letter of exoneration on a Tuesday morning. He was standing in the parking lot of the car wash on Montpelier Avenue when Monica called. He sat down on the curb, still in his work apron, and read the letter on his phone 3 times. He didn't cry. He had used up crying a long time ago. What he felt instead was something quieter and stranger. The specific sensation of a weight being removed that had been there so long, he had stopped noticing its presence and only recognized it now by its absence. He laminated the letter that afternoon, kept it in his shirt pocket for a week before moving it to his wallet, where it stayed. Marcus Tillman drove back to Savannah the day the order came through. He sat on Elijah's porch for 2 hours. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. 2 men who had spent decades being the only person in every room who knew the full weight of a particular name, sitting on a porch in November, watching the street, understanding each other without explanation. The state of Georgia awarded the Morse family compensation. The figure was substantial. Elijah didn't keep it. He used the majority to establish the Calvin Morse Justice Fund, a nonprofit providing legal aid, transitional housing, and counseling for wrongfully convicted individuals and their families across Georgia. Monica Osei signed on as founding counsel. Pro bono. The remaining funds were distributed among the 5 other families in the notebook. Jalen asked him why he kept nothing. Elijah looked at him for a moment. I didn't do this for money. I did this so your father's name could be clean. The money belongs to the people who lost what we lost. Then Diane Pruitt called. She asked if she could come by. Elijah said yes. She came on a Wednesday evening and sat at the kitchen table where her father had sat uninvited 3 months earlier. She didn't make a speech. She said, I'm sorry it took me 4 years. I'm sorry it took me that long to understand that staying quiet was a choice. Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, You're not your father. You proved that. She nodded. That was all either of them needed. Jalen graduated from the University of Georgia School of Law the following May. He finished second in his class. His thesis was titled Silent Evidence: How Suppressed Forensics Fuel Wrongful Conviction in American Courts. His faculty advisor submitted it to 3 law journals and called it the most consequential student paper she had read in 15 years. On graduation morning, Elijah sat in the 4th row of the auditorium in his best coat. When they called Jalen's name, he did not cheer. He reached into his breast pocket, took out Calvin's photograph, and held it against his chest with both hands and closed his eyes. Jalen accepted his diploma and walked directly to his grandfather. He knelt in front of his seat, still in his cap and gown, and said, We did it, Grandpa. All 3 of us. He became the Calvin Morse Justice Fund's first staff attorney. His first case was a 22-year-old in Brunswick, convicted on a single eyewitness identification that the witness had already partially recanted. Jalen had the conviction overturned in 91 days. On the 1-year anniversary of the safe's opening, the fund held a gathering at the house on Drayton Street. The porch railing had been repaired. The front door had a new coat of paint. Devin Price brought sweet potato pie. Marcus Tillman brought his daughter, who was meeting Elijah for the first time. Curtis Webb arrived last, stood in the front yard for 10 minutes before Jalen walked out and brought him in. In the living room corner, the safe sat cleaned and polished. The rust was gone. But the dent on the left panel and the scratch across the dial face remained. Elijah had told the restoration company to leave them exactly as they were. Above it, on a small wooden shelf, sat the locksmith box, lid open, the listener resting across the top. A hand-lettered card leaned against the box in Elijah's handwriting. Bought for $60. Worth 30 years of truth. Elijah stood in front of the safe at the end of the evening after the food was gone, and the conversation had quieted, and the room had settled into the particular warmth of people who have survived something enormous together. He placed his palm flat against the cold steel. Calvin, he said quietly. Ruth. He paused. I found it. The room was still. Outside Drayton Street moved through its ordinary evening. A neighbor waved from across the road. A dog barked somewhere down the block. The porch light came on automatically at dusk, the way it always had, the way it had come on every evening for 41 years, in a house that had held more grief than most buildings are asked to hold, and had held it anyway. Elijah took his hand off the safe. He sat down in his chair, and for the first time in 30 years, he slept through the night. Some people carry the truth for decades because no one else will. They get laughed at. They get threatened. They get told to let it go. But they don't let it go because they understand that the truth doesn't belong to them alone. It belongs to everyone the lie was used against. If you have ever refused to stop fighting for something that mattered, this story was for you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Let Elijah and Calvin know you were here. And if you believe one person with enough patience can change everything, subscribe. There are more safes waiting to be opened. More names waiting to be clean.